I want to congratulate you and We the World on the 20th anniversary of 11 days of global unity. Together, you, me, and we can create a better world and have fun doing it.
Thank you, Dr. Jane Goodall, for helping We the World and all our partners to celebrate more than 20 years of 11 days of global unity. And thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit. My name is Rick Ulfik, and I am the founder of We the World and the We campaign at we.net and the co-creator of 11 Days of Global Unity. Today, as part of the first theme of the 11 Days, Unity, I'm excited that we will be joined by Reverend Dr. Joni Carley, who will be talking about applying metaphysics for meta-level transformation. For the full 11 Days Summit schedule, you can register for free by going to 11daysofglobalunity.org. 11 is a numeral in 11daysofglobalunity.org. There you can see all the 11 Days Summit broadcasts. And at we.net, you can take action with the 11 campaigns for change, subscribe to Trends magazine, and you can make a contribution to support all of this work by going to we.net/donate. Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge some of our amazing partners during 11 Days of Global Unity and all year round. Peace Day Philly, the Unite for Peace Coalition, which includes Unity Earth, the Sign Network, One World, Hubcast Media, The Awakening World, We the World, also Climate Week, the Unitive Cluster at the UN, the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence, Pause the World in Times Square, and Pace e Bene Nonviolence Campaign. What an amazing movement representing literally millions of people working to achieve global unity, all working with We the World and the We campaign at we.net. Today, we will be addressing the theme of unity, the consequences of having disunity in our society is affecting humanity's ability to properly address our greatest challenges, like climate disruption, poverty and inequality, war, and the functioning of our democracy in the USA, which affects the whole world. Now I'm excited for you to meet Reverend Dr. Joni Carley.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. Joni Carley is the author of The Alchemy of Power, Mastering the Invisible Factors of Leadership. She works on consciousness and culture through advisory consulting services, including as a United Nations ECOSOC consultant and convener of the UN NGO Major Groups Unitive Cluster. She speaks and writes about creating a principles-based, values-driven, unified world. And I and we are so excited to hear about the mission that you are on. And I have some questions for you that relate to unity and the topic of our conversation, which is applying metaphysics for meta level transformation. Welcome to the broadcast, Reverend Dr. Joni Carley.
Thank you, Rick.
It's great to see you. Is it okay if I call you Joni?
For sure.
Okay, good. So Joni, I have 3 topics we can discuss. I'll mention them quickly, and then you can talk about each of them in detail. Can you please define metaphysics? How can the principles of metaphysics be applied? And what is the historical context? What is the shift that is needed now? So before you get into all that, I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about yourself, your background, and about the mission that you are on right now. Thank you, Joni.
Yes. Well, my mission is really about global transformation. And what I'm realizing is that we can't fix the old paradigm. It's not a plan for survival. We're clear about that. And so many of us know that there needs to be deep and rapid transformation because we are in serious times. We're in the times between the times, really. There's an old way of being that no longer serves. It's crumbling in its own violence and other issues and environmental degradation. And then there is something emerging, right? Anything that's going away composts whatever is going to come next. And so what's coming next is emergent. It's not here yet. And that's why we're in these in-between times. The shamans call them sometimes the liminal times, the time between time. And so we're in that transitionary period. And how we think and what we do in these times is really, really, really critical. And for me, I recognize the value in people serving food to children and doing really good work. And that's not enough in these times because there's always going to be more hungry children because our paradigm is wired that way. And so if we want to create a paradigm where we make child services obsolete because we get the culture so right, the children naturally develop well no matter what their needs, those are deep cultural corrections. And they're it's not something that we're going to go from one step to the next easily or quickly. Quick is all relative. When we're talking about paradigmatic change, quick is decades, right? So, this may take some generations to really totally make the leap, but we are leaping. And so it often feels like the ground isn't there beneath us, that we don't know what we're leaping to. That's still emergent. It still needs to be designed and pulled together. And there are lots of amazing people working at that level all over the world, including at the UN with the Unitive cluster, and including in the group the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence, which came together to bring evolutionary wisdom into the global conversation that's anchored at the United Nations. And that conversation is asking for a transformation of global governance and a transformation of the global economic architecture. That's radical. Those are a lot of words to say, but that's radical to transform those very deep infrastructures. And to transform those, we have to transform ourselves and a lot of our ideas about what's true, what's not true, what's good, what's not good.
I get it. Thank you for setting the stage for us. So, can you unpack the word metaphysics? What are the principles involved?
Well, metaphysics is the science and the philosophy of causality. So it's a whole lot more than that, but I think that's the really simplest way of thinking about it, is what causes what. And, how do we go from consciousness to manifestation? Well, there's a lot of gap in there, and that's the domain of metaphysics, not completely, but largely. And so you can think of it like an iceberg. The top of the iceberg, you can see it, you know what's there, it's easy to manage, but that's only maybe 5% of the iceberg. Most of it is under the surface. And so the same is true about our lives. We know that we only know about 5% of our reality. That's what our quantum physicists tell us. And that's settled science. There's about 95%, some say 99%, that is mostly mystery. And much of that is in the domain of metaphysics. And so metaphysics has to do with that domain of intangibility. It's why, if I really value something deep down, it'll drive my behavior, but I can't say that I got a cookie for it, right? And it may just drive a change in my own mindset. Well, what does that mean? Turns out it means a lot, because every social crisis is first and foremost a crisis of consciousness and culture. So what is it that we're setting ourselves up for? We need to become that individual consciousness that's fertile ground, but it needs to be bigger than that. And it needs to be the consciousness of knowing our unity. And that's, I think, is really important to bring up here, Rick. Unity is not some utopian aspiration. The science is very clear now, and Jude Curvan is a leader in this science, that unity is our existential reality. Unity is just what's so. The problem is that our habits, our behaviors, our laws, and our mythology tells us something different than that we're separate, that we have to compete, that, that's total mythology. Science doesn't back it up. It just happens to be that our systems are so wired that way, and we've been swimming in that water for so many millennia that it's really hard for us to see it just doesn't, I don't mean to pull the metaphor through, but it doesn't hold water, right? It's mythological, where we know now that the reality of our unity is what's so. And if that's what's so, the question for the paradigm that we want to bring forward is, how do we create our systems, our governance, our economics around that reality? That survival of the fittest is not about who you can fight against the hardest. Past when it's a singular cellular organism, it's cooperation that survives. Cooperators survive. And we know that from the very basis of life, all the way through the most complicated species, arguably ourselves. So, we have a whole new basis for a whole new paradigm. And the work now is to get over there. And some of what's emerging now is this deeper sense of what's true and what's right. So we've had some pretty concrete ideas about this. You do X, Y, Z, you get A, B, C, and you have to get a project. Everything's got to be oriented to making things physical, and that orientation is just wrong, because 5% of reality is physical. If you don't deal with that underlying consciousness that's generating it, you got to keep on feeding more kids. You got to keep on doing the thing when the iceberg can't hold. The bottom is shaky in our current paradigm. And so it's first and foremost the work of consciousness, in the paradigm of consciousness. And that's where we start to get into issues of metaphysics, because how do you dance in that domain of consciousness? Well, I go back to one of my earliest teachers, of many all over the world. It was Michio Kushi in macrobiotics, who I learned a lot about yin and yang through. And yes, we are unified, we are whole, and we're individuated. And as soon as we're born, we are dualistic. We have a front and a back. We have an inside and an outside. We have an up and a down. We are dualistic. That's just what's so, male and female. And so we have yin, the expansive, the intangible, the area of consciousness, and we have yang, the doing, the numbers, the data, the widgets, the production. And so over many millennia, we've highly prioritized the yang. We've had mostly male-dominated militia and religious leaders, and by the way, all the major religions, and especially most of the indigenous teachings, corroborate what the science is saying about us all being unified. They've been saying that forever. The sages through the ages, that's what they've always said. The science has just caught up, and it's very coherent. People think these are separate things. They're getting more and more coherent. And so we know now that unity is our reality, and that a way of kind of playing with this metaphysically is to look at the yin and the yang. And I think this is especially helpful because we know we're so yang dominant at this point. Military money, it gets spent long before food money is appropriated. We really, if you go to work as sick as you are, no problem because the quota got met. Right? You have a child who needs extra care. Well, that's not in the budget. That kind of thinking. There's a saying at the UN, no one left behind, but in indigenous cultures, that would be a ridiculous, they wouldn't even be able to understand the concept of a behind. And so as long as we're wired for a behind, there's always going to be somebody in it. And part of how we're wired that way is this yang dominant consciousness that all of us have inherited. I've written a book about it, and I can't say I'm necessarily any further ahead than anybody else in this, because it's how we've been acculturated for so long to believe in, I say that we've had yangitis, that we've been yang dominant for so long. We're erring into the, really dysfunctional area of yang. And so there is this movement to swing back to what's being called the feminine. And that's beautiful work, but we have to be careful of using gender here, because gender is a very narrow lane in the broad spectrum of the human experience. And especially right now, gender is so fluid that it barely even makes sense sometimes to use gender. And when you use gender, you get into the othering. If you're not a female, then you're a male. That's the other. And, in some ways, we need to bifurcate to find a differentiation and our unique contributions within our wholeness. And on the other hand, that kind of genderizing of this really narrows the bandwidth of dealing with the metaphysical, because if you go into yin and yang, which is never absolute, right? There's always a little yin dot in the yang and a little yang dot in the yin, because it's not absolute and it's very relativistic. And there's not a lot of cultural baggage that comes with this concept. That's why I like it as a very clean and clear way to start to manage the metaphysics. And so, if we look at, where am I feeling pressured? Often that's some kind of yang dominance, pushing for something. And we want that breath. We want the yin. And it's not really about balance, right? Because if you breathe in, you're more yin. If you breathe out, you're more yang, or vice versa, depending on how you interpret it. And it doesn't really matter, because what we're just talking about is energetics. So you can call it anything. But we tend to think of yin more expansive, yang more contracting. And so, and generally what we would think of as more feminine is more yin, and more masculine, generally more yang. But again, it really helps to nuance, because as soon as you get into this bifurcation of gender, it gets really a very constricted conversation, and one with some serious pitfalls. And so I think really our job of these times is to yin out. I say in my book, The Metaphysics of the Alchemy of Power, is when in doubt, yin out. And alchemy, by the way, is the ability to use the metaphysics, is to be able to say, hey, I need a little yin in this moment. Let me take a breath. To be able to see, this is the way of the warrior. It's not about balance, because if you hit that absolute homeostasis between breathing in and breathing out, and you maintained it, you'd have to die right then and there. And even then you wouldn't maintain it. That's what the Tao says. It's always changing. And so the nature is always changing. And so how do we manage that under invisible drive of these changes is where we need consciousness and metaphysics to really work on this. And so it's really about opening to the metaphysics and recognizing that these deeper intangibles, that the more we know about them, the more the mystery opens up to even more. And so it's this constant, never knowing mystery that's ever unfolding that we try to access. But if we don't open into the yin, we get almost no access to that. And that's where life happens from, is the intentionality and the vision that arises, the imaginal cells that begin to arise, that then creates our reality.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So if you were going to kind of concretize what you're saying in terms of principles, how would you express those principles?
Well, younger, that life is always changing, and there is this emergent something from within and beyond within that's unique in each of us and common to all of us. And it's really about honoring that, not a set of principles like rules, but principles of looking at the dynamics of the universe and being accountable. And saying, am I being so young that I'm dominating a conversation? Am I dominating? Riane Eisler uses partnership language of partnership and domination. Partnership more yin, domination more yang. And to look at my own, to really study your own intentions and to give honor. This is one of the problems. We've all been so conditioned to step over this yin intelligence, this yin wisdom, this yin what we tap into, this mystery. It tends to be thrown off as woo-woo or inconsequential, fluffy stuff, right? How you feel and that your intuition, all of those things are often really degraded in modern thinking and society. And I think the most important principle I have to share is that the metaphysics matter. And as we come into this new paradigm, we're tuning into a new level of vibration, and to really live into the unity that is already so, there's a harmony we need to come into. And so it's about listening for that harmony. It's about the way of the warrior is to be able to go a little more yang when he needs to and she needs to, or a little more yin when they need to. It's never about being balanced and stuck in one place. It's the equanimity to be able to be very yin, to be able to be very yang, to be able to stay in a flow where it's not so extreme most of the time, so that you have the balance, the footing to then be in full command and full act when you move into action. And that's what our old young dominant paradigm is all about: action, take action, do a project, and it can result right now, or you're not doing anything. And if projects alone were enough, we would already have an amazing world, because there are fabulous people doing fabulous projects out there. And what's happening is the need for more projects. And we really need to set new ground that is more comprehensive of the yin, ground that is more geared toward children being happy, well, and fed. Putting these kinds of first principles first, the Declaration of Human Rights, make that the core center of governance and economics. That people get paid to be happy and well and express, and to keep society going in ways that we need it to be going. But that the dollars flow also toward the spiritual, toward the creative, toward the joy. All of that is what humans value the most, and yet we place almost no value on that in our economic valuations. And so our valuations are very young skewed. They value the tanks. They value the new home starts with no value for the home that's falling down, which could be called the yin. The home that's falling down is the yin. It's disregarded. It's just junk. And then we value what the new construction. And that's just crazy, because it's not good for the environment. It's not good for neighborhoods. So, and that is all, if you look, just, pull back and really look at a meta level viewpoint of that, it's such yang dominance that it's a culture that has swung so far yangward, it doesn't know how to value what's really valuable, like a beautiful woods and a path to walk on through them.
That makes sense. And I know you're very interested in developing leadership that can take these principles and apply them to creating a better world. So do you want to talk about leadership and what's going on now? We have all kinds of leaders, but not all of them are working towards what I would call a better world, well, a world that works for all.
Yeah, we don't have conscious leaders. We certainly don't have incentives. Very many of them. There are some beginning to arise from within systems to incentivize leaders, but we do have leaders who are searching for a different way of leadership, and that's who I wrote my book for, The Alchemy of Power: Mastering the Invisible Factors of Leadership, and that's available on Amazon. And so let's look at power first. So power is the capacity to harness or disrupt energy. So to either bring it together and shoot it out of the wall in a particular way, which, by the way, needs a particular combination of yin and yang. If you got too much of the positive current coming through the wall, you'd have a problem. You want to you want that to flow, right? And that's a good analogy. And so alchemy is being conscious about that. Is it time to disrupt? Is it time to cohere? Exactly what and how am I cohering? I have lots at the end of every chapter of my book is leadership reflections that applies this stuff to what's on your desk right now. And because it sounds very heady, but the energetics are not. The energetics are really the vibrational level is where all things happen first. That's the bottom of the iceberg. So for leaders to pay attention there, which they're taught away from in MBA programs, they're taught away from it really from very young ages. And so to go back and honor, what was that inkling? What was that sense of somebody's hurting? And how does that change the culture? I'm certified with Richard Barrett's values measurements tools, cultural values assessments. And we quantify cultures by measuring values, because values are even more than genetics, values are what drive human behaviors. And they're really what pull communities together. Values are the building blocks of communities, and they basically trace needs. So we're working right now with an intern from Cameroon, and they need electricity. I mean, so that's what they value right now is just some basic services. I'm privileged. I can value principles because my basic needs are met. And so I can value principles that want to change the world. And she does too. I just have some bandwidth. And if she and I could work on with a more equitable foundation in a new paradigmatic order, then how much more she would be enabled to do, because she's brilliant and highly capable. And so, enabling all of her all over the world would bring us to a very different world for people to be able to give their gifts. And this is what leaders need to know, because it seems like you're wasting time if you do that. You stop and figure out what's the feel, and for me, Rick, I call it mojo. Really, that's the theme of my book. If there's one theme, I would call it mojo. And that's what leaders need to look for. Like, walk in a room, and mojo is that energy, that zip, pizzazz, that spark of life that makes life live, right? There's that invisible spark, again, that's unique in each of us and common to all of us. It's something that's part of a larger flame somehow, some way, that's always a mystery to us. And there is also that knowing, that deep inner connectedness with that power that drives us, that's just so mysterious. It's yin and it's yang. And so for a leader to take the time to be in that space, to have the confidence that this is not inconsequential, fluffy stuff. I call that the fluffy myth in my book. that looking at mojo is fluffy. It's not fluffy at all, because if you've got all that energy really popping, like the energy in the wall coming out in good way, you can charge all kinds of things. That's the mojo that a leader wants. That's the energy that a leader wants, mojo. And it's a big job to manage people's mojo because it's powerful. And it takes a different kind of leader that's done their own internal healing, that continues to do it. We're all always a work in progress. And so, leader always doing their own work. The problem is often when people are speaking about that kind of work, it becomes kind of a narcissistic wheel where the question needs to be asked, and so what? And now what? How do I bring this into the greater whole? As I develop myself, so am I developing the world, especially if I drop into this unitive consciousness that we work so much on. And so a leader reminding themselves, am I in this unitive consciousness? Do I realize that the least of my crew is struggling, and therefore so am I, and so are we. And now so what? And now what? And that might take a 10-minute or a 15-minute or a 3-day detour. And it's not to say you get caught up in everybody's personal problems, not at all. But it's to say, how's the mojo sparking in yourself? How's my mojo? Walk into a room or onto any area of your workplace and just kind of take a breath, settle in and say, how's the mojo right here? Because mojo is really that way that the metaphysics manifest.
Yeah, I hear you. It sounds like you could do a lot of metaphysical coaching. Do you actually do that one-on-one?
I do.
You
Yeah.
do. Very interesting.
Yeah, and really, I don't call it metaphysical coaching. It's leadership advising, but really helping leaders hold the ground. That is this larger ground, because we're also oriented to this very narrow bandwidth of ground that's crumbling beneath us. And so to really get this larger perspective, because the data is very clear. When values are honored and when values are accounted for and consciously managed, the money gets better, whether it's through social programs or profits. People are in better health and well-being. They work together better. Productivity goes up huge. So these things are well planned out, but because we're so indoctrinated in the fluffy myth and we're buying into this fluff mythology, we feel like, and especially leaders, because they have the pressures on, they feel like if they take the time to do this, if they're not on mission, they're not on task. And so that's, again, the metaphysics matter, and the mojo is your way of seeing the metaphysics. And mojo is going to happen when the yin and the yang are in a good dance, And, there are times when it's time to just crack the whip and everybody gets in there and gets into the yang. But then you got to make sure there's some yin, big yang. And that's kind of a universal principle no matter what. The question is how conscious are you going to be about it? And that's where the alchemy comes in. Are you going to manage that you've just completely made this team so incredibly intense for good purpose? Are you then going to manage the swinging that the pendulum of humanity and time usually does? And that usually means, going into some of the other values in this community, which if you measure, you'll find out what they are. Very often they're assumed, and that's just ridiculous because you can't assume values. And often they're just on leaders' walls. There's 5 values words that everybody liked, and they're on the wall, and they mean nothing in terms of how the culture is carried out. You have to measure the culture. And that, I think, is really critical. We know that it is the best determinant of outcomes, culture, period. That's irrefutable by far. Culture determines outcomes. And yet very few managers, very few leaders are accounting for the culture. And so it's so basic and so easy. And yeah, it takes some time. It takes some looking yinward, which feels like it's not doing anything. It's the being and the doing. That, that's really what makes the human heart pump, is the being and the doing, not just the doing, which is where a lot of leaders think they have to be. And that's what leads to broken relationships, less productivity, and often a lot of pain within physical and emotional within the leader themselves.
Yeah. So talking about culture, I'm very interested and involved with media. And for me, the messages of the media become the fabric of our culture. So I just figured I'd mention that because culture and things like cultural shifts are so important. And I was thinking, I know you're interested in talking about the historical context, and I think that has to do with the kinds of shifts that we have been seeing because of the changes in the culture as time has gone. So
Yeah, I worked with the cultural environment movement, and I actually was the drafter, pen holder for the People's Communication Charter and the Declaration of Viewers' Independence that's filed in The Hague, in global governance. And what we did was we looked at media use all over the world and translated all the laws and documents, and got it into a good couple of documents. And I learned a lot from that. Media does, it's media is a product of the culture, and then it also it feeds back to where it creates the culture. And so it's a very important part of it. And bless you, Rick, for putting great media out there during the 11 days, and everyone who's watching. It changes the world to spend the time here instead of doom scrolling or what, some of the other things that are possible online. And to support the media that brings forward messages that dignify the human condition, that dignify where we are, where we might be as a culture, and that speak to the vision of the world we want to live in. That's not Pollyanna, it's not woo-woo, and that's the kind of judgmentalism that we have to get out of our own heads, and we have to understand that this new world is calling for a new way of being. And we each have to do our own work, and it involves some falling apart. That's the yin. It falls apart into chaos, right? But unless you get all those elements, it's like the caterpillar going into the cocoon, falls apart into just an imaginal soup. I mean, just a nutrient soup. There's nothing there but cells that you can't bring one caterpillar leg through and have that become the butterfly leg. That's not how it works. It would end up just sticking out of the middle of the wing of the butterfly or something, because it would be a deformity. That falling apart is part of it, and that's something that in a yang dominant worldview, you can't fall apart. You got to keep it together. The yin says, yeah, release, let go, let the nutrient soup bubble. And then imaginal cells start to form, which is a very big yin, the visionary. They start to come through in the cocoon, starts to imagine this butterfly, and then the cells start to group accordingly. And we, in the Deep and Rapid Transformation Convergence, this is the metaphor we use a lot, that we've been in a nutrient soup, and there are imaginal cells now emerging all over the world, including in some very high places, including at the UN, for the next emergence of a butterfly. And it's probably going to be an evolutionary leap of a butterfly. It may not be the one that went in as to the quite the same species that became caterpillar represented, because of the times we're in. And that's why consciousness is so important right now. And leaders and everyone, your consciousness matters. And that's the work. You say, thank you for sharing. No problem when you go down the rabbit hole of getting, too young, but bringing it back and saying, yeah, just the discipline to come back and saying there is this whole spectrum of reality, that we need to honor all places in it.
So do you think we are, as a species, moving towards that kind of society or collection of societies? Or are we floundering around and maybe going in a direction that is not sustainable? I see
Not sustainable.
I see evidence in both directions a lot, and it's not clear to me. And I know you've talked about how some current practices are definitely not a survival plan for humanity, right? So do you feel that we are collectively, inching towards that emergence that is sustainable?
Do you think it's at both ends? I think we are collapsing. I think many systems are collapsing. There are some countries where people, island nations, small island nations, where all the people have already had to move off the country because the sea is swallowing them up. I mean, this is very real in places where, we live in a kind of privilege here on the East Coast, and but there are populations in the world that are facing this and are not interested in being colonized or interested necessarily in pulling these ways through. And as American politics are suffering so badly and American governance is suffering so badly, it's kind of feeding in and making the collapse come sooner. Its lack of compassion, its lack of justice makes it more painful of a transition. But the transition was coming no matter, the election was about the left and the right of the same old box. And a new paradigm is about a new box. And again, that's not something that just shows up the next day with the next election. Although it is something that shows up moment to moment as we all imagine what we want next. And it could go either way. I mean, we are so close to nuking ourselves off the planet that, people may not survive. The planet's probably going to come back at some point, but it's really, we're at a choice point. That's these in-between times aren't a given. I think what is a given is that this paradigm can't hold. It's not holding. And so it's kind of an imminent collapse. The question is how compassionate can we be through this collapse? And how much can we really bring through of the goodness of humanity? People want good things for themselves, for their kids, for everybody else generally, and a lot of the kind of crimes that come through are products of a culture. Culture is like a culture in a lab dish. It'll hold some things, it'll grow some things, and it won't grow other things. And so the culture, we're growing a culture of violence and need and some horrific conditions globally and here in America. And so the question is, how do we bring in a nurturing culture where all beings thrive? And where we live in accordance with our existential unity, where we know there's enough for everybody's need, but not enough for some people's greed. And so how do we shift the basis of our laws, of our fundamental documents, of our practices, and our policies to be more anchored in this more truthful basis of our unity, of our highest aspirations of human rights, of goodness and justice for everybody. So that's
That
really
makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's just so important that in these times we keep our consciousness ahead on the road. I mean, certainly present in the moment. And there's Marianne Williamson has talked about there's only the Course in Miracles, there's only two things, love and fear. And where this comes back to your question about media, so much of the media is fear-based because that's what brings a person to the next commercial, right? Because it heightens your sensibilities. Fear does that. And so to recognize I'm really jazzed right now by fear because I've just seen this and this and this. It's a media literacy that's missing. Many countries have done that quite well, by the way. We're not doing well with it here. But that's been a thing for 30 years. So that's a piece of it. And a piece of it is just being accountable for our own consciousness and not to fall into the fear. When I say collapse, it's it may not be pretty, and there could be some pretty hard times for sure. And it's not about fear, it's about what rises, what flowers grow through the composting, through the, with the power of all things being dispersed or many things being dispersed and not making sense, then how do we bring back together? I'll give you one example. The African Union has not been a very strong institution, and now it is. And with America kind of shooting itself in the foot in terms of its global positioning, there's opportunity for Africa to come through and to stabilize in a whole new way. That's where the best soil for growing food is. It's where a lot of the minerals we need for computers and processing and all of that are in African soil. And so we have this nascent and many places still very connected with its indigenous wisdom, with its knowing of the harmony and the equanimity of walking the warrior way in harmony and in recognition of our existential unity.
Mm-hmm. And we have a few branches of We the World in Africa. Leading the way is in Botswana with our dear friend Tato Angelina Habaetsi. But we also have a lot of people in Nigeria and Burundi, Rwanda. So I'm glad you're thinking about and focusing on Africa, because we have a very strong presence there as well.
There's still a lot of traditional cultures in Africa. And so this bring in terms of understanding these energetics. That's what the shamans and the healers, they work with the energetics. They honor those energetics. That's metaphysical that we really need our indigenous brothers and sisters to bring through, our brothers and sisters who are still in the Ubuntu culture. I am because you are, that deep, deep understanding of our unity that's imbued in that culture. Right, that's a major contribution to the world, and as Africa becomes more powerful in its own leadership within and beyond, those are the kinds of things that will then start to fertilize the ground where some of our leadership issues have pulled us apart.
What we're doing with each of the 11 themes with 11 days, all kind of agreed that we want to end with each of these programs with a call to action, given all what's going on in the USA and elsewhere. So many of us are using the hashtag urgency for action, which is the word urgency and then the numeral 4 and then the word action. So urgency for action. And so my question to you is, can we have a metaphysical call to action? What are you calling for in that way? And how would you like people to take action in their own lives or for their families, their communities, and the world?
Pay attention to the mojo. Pay attention to that spark of life. Honor it, fertilize it, grow, really allow space for that yin kind of, really the spark is the yin and the yang, but the yin has been so cried out that leave space for metaphysical experience, make space for it. You might have to really be diligent about making that space. You might have to be yang about getting yin. And that's the nature of yin and yang. They kind of spin around in each other. But, pay attention to the metaphysics. The metaphysics matter. The mojo matters. And be mindful of that and dare to dream, to dance, and to move in accordance with what your inner life is telling you, what your inner knowing is telling you, and how your mojo will be most magical.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So here's my call to action. I think it reflects the yin and yang. So my call to action is what we call the We Power campaign. And it's all about the power of we. So in a sense, that's the yin part. And what we're doing together is, I guess, the yang part, right? So it is integrated in that sense. So the power of we is literally millions of us coming together to transform our society so it prioritizes the common good. To help launch the We Power campaign, you can go to we.net, which is the grand central for all of these things, we.net. But you can go to we.net/We Power campaign. And then you can be part of this group that's interested in launching this.
I'm just really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for asking me, Rick. And my book, The Alchemy of Power, is available on Amazon.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. So this has been really amazing and inspiring and provocative. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Joni Carley, so much.
Yeah.
And thank all of you for watching this. And thank you for being part of 11 Days of Global Unity. To get involved, please go to we.net. And it's all about we, right? So let's go from, this is like an M, right? So we can go from a me-based society to a we-based society. And that's why we launched we.net. So together we can create a world that works for all. So love to you, and thank you all for joining us.